Still recording. Hello again, it's me, Chaz. This is episode 4 now of the FIFA members France videos. We're going to focus on the World Cup in the 80s and 90s. Hope you enjoy. Okay, let's move on to the 80s. But at this point in time, outside of the 1958 World Cup, France haven't really performed well, failing to qualify for a few and not making it out the group stage in quite a lot of the World Cups they were in, at least from 1930 till 1978. The 1982 World Cup, Spain was the hosts. More nations started to become a part of FIFA, especially from Europe, which makes the UEFA zone got bigger. So more teams were in groups to qualify. France was in Group 2 to try and qualify for the World Cup in 1982. They were in a group of 5 with Belgium, Republic of Ireland, who they've been in a group with quite a few times, Netherlands and Cyprus. France started their 1982 World Cup qualifying campaign by beating Cyprus 7-0. They continued winning by beating the Republic of Ireland 2-0. However, they did lose to the Netherlands 1-0. They bounced back from that defeat, beating Belgium 3-2. They had a rough run-in a little bit, losing to both Belgium 2-0 and then Ireland 3-2. But their final 2 games, they beat Netherlands 2-0 and then Cyprus 4-0. They were able to finish second and beat the Republic of Ireland by goal difference. So France and Belgium together, both founding members of FIFA and both part of the original 13, qualified for the 1982 World Cup. This World Cup was one of France's better performances. England and France were put in the same group again. The last time they were put in the same group, England went on to win in the World Cup, and that was in '66. They were joined by Czechoslovakia, who were runners-up twice, 1934 and in 1962. And Kuwait, who made it to their very first World Cup. They haven't qualified for a World Cup since 1982. France didn't have a good start, and they lost to England 3-1. Brian Robson scored twice for England. But France bounced back from that defeat. They went on to beat Kuwait 4-1. Platini scored in that game. Then went on to get in a point against Slovakia, making it 1-1. France, by finishing second, they were able to qualify for the second group phase. France was put into Group D. In the second group phase, instead of groups of 4, there were groups of 3. Austria and Northern Ireland were the other 2 nations in their group. France have actually played both of these nations in the past, as I mentioned earlier. They played Austria at the 1934 World Cup, where they lost 3-2 after extra time. And they beat Northern Ireland 4-0 in the quarterfinals in 1958. This time around, they beat Austria 1-0. And they beat Northern Ireland again, this time 4-1. They managed to top their group and went through to the semi-finals, the final 4. France played West Germany in a semi-final. That match ended 3-3 after extra time, 1-1 in the very first half. No goals were scored in the second. Then when it went to extra time, both nations managed to score another 2. France were actually 3-1 up at one point. West Germany turned it around. And then when they went to penalties, West Germany won 5-4. West Germany ended up runners-up at that World Cup to Italy. This time, when third place playoff, Poland beat France 3-2. That's the best performance of Poland, by the way. But yeah, unlike in 1958, France didn't win the third place playoff this time around. At the time, this was France's second best performance at a World Cup. Okay, 1986, the World Cup was again hosted in Mexico. Now, France missed out on the 1970 World Cup when it was hosted in Mexico. This time, they didn't miss out on it. They were put in Group 4 of the UEFA World Cup qualifying zone. France were put in a familiar group with teams such as Bulgaria, who have been in their group before, Yugoslavia, as mentioned, and Luxembourg. East Germany is the first time those two teams would have met in a competitive game. At least when it comes to the World Cup, France and Bulgaria qualify from this group. A common thing when it comes to the World Cup and France, when they play Luxembourg in the qualifiers, they beat them by a fair amount of goals, this time 4-0. They continue winning when they beat Bulgaria 1-0, thanks to a penalty from Platini. Continued their winning by beating East Germany 2-0. But was stopped by Yugoslavia when they drew 0-0 to them away from home. Then they went on to lose to Bulgaria 2-0. And then East Germany 2-0. So after having a great start, they did slip up a bit. But when playing Luxembourg again, they beat them 6-0. Then beat Yugoslavia 2-0. To finish their World Cup campaign. That saw them top their table and finish with Bulgaria. Both nations made it to the 1986 World Cup. 86 was different from the previous three World Cups. There was no group stage 2, and a third place team could possibly qualify from a group. The top 2 teams of each group and the 4 best third team finishers would go through to the knockout stages, the round of 16. I think this World Cup was also the first one that they changed the groups from Group 1, 2, 3 and that into letters. I know that the previous World Cups had different groups, and the first phase, had groups that were numbered, and then the second group phase had groups that were alphabetical. So in letters, this World Cup is where they scrapped the numbers and now groups were in alphabetical order. France was in Group C. They were joined by Soviet Union, who have been in their group in the past. Hungary, another nation that was in their group. And Canada. That was Canada's very first World Cup that they played in. They didn't qualify again till the most recent World Cup in 2022, and they will qualify again as the 2026 co-hosts. France started off the campaign well, beating Canada 1-0, and they drew with Soviet Union 1-0 in their next game. Finally, they beat Hungary 3-0. The Soviet Union and France were the only 2 teams in that group to qualify. Hungary weren't good enough as the best third place finishers. Soviet Union had a better goal difference than France, so they topped their group. France went on to play Italy and they beat them 2-0. Goals from Platini and Stoppere saw to a 2-0 victory for France. This would be the first time that France did beat Italy at the World Cup. And officially as a win, the other time France did beat Italy was in 98, but that was on penalties, so it's officially known as a draw. France went on to play Brazil in the next round. They won 1-0, beating Brazil 4-3 on penalties, though. Platini scored another goal in that game. It was an equaliser. But again, France ended up playing West Germany and getting knocked out in the semi-finals. Hard for them. But France did secure their third place by beating Belgium 4-2 after extra time. This is the second time that France did beat Belgium. The first time was in 1938 in the round of 16. France do go on to beat Belgium again in 2018 on their way to the final, which they won. I'll talk more about that later. Okay, that was the 80s. Now let's move on to the 90s. But at that point, definitely in the 80s, they got stronger. 2 semi-final finishes in a row. They were getting there. But similar to the 70s, France failed to qualify for 2 World Cups in a row. That's the 1990 World Cup in Italy. That was Italy's second time hosting it. And the 1994 World Cup in the United States of America. So after 2 promising World Cups in a row in the 80s, they didn't have a good start in the 90s. So let's discuss the qualifying process for them. Again, 2 nations in a group that France was in would qualify for the World Cup. Those 2 nations were Yugoslavia and Scotland. The other 2 nations in that group was Norway and Cyprus. France have met these teams either proper or in qualifying. France finished 3rd, which was a point behind Scotland. Beat Norway in their first game at home. Then drew to Cyprus, late penalty from Pittas in the 78th minute. Then they lost to Yugoslavia 3-2 away. And Scotland 2-0. Mo Johnston scoring 2 goals for Scotland. And France drew with Yugoslavia. And then Norway, meaning they didn't win a game in 5 matches. They did beat Scotland 3-0. Cantona scored in that game. And they finally was able to beat Cyprus. But after picking up in the last couple of games, it wasn't enough. And Scotland got the 2nd spot, as well as Yugoslavia, who topped that group. Meaning France failed to qualify for the 1990 World Cup in Italy. France also missed out in the 1994 World Cup, just about, finishing on 13 points, 1 point behind Bulgaria, who was 2nd, and 2 points behind Sweden, who were 1st. The other nations in their group in the UEFA World Cup qualifiers for 1994 World Cup was Austria, Finland, and Israel. France was in Group 6. So they failed to beat Bulgaria in their very first game, but beat Austria in their second game. Papin and Cantona scored for them. Players again scored in their 2-1 win over Finland. And Cantona scored again in their 4-0 away win against Israel. And then they beat Austria this time. Papin managed to score. And Cantona 2-1 against Sweden's. It looked like France was going to come back and return to the World Cup. They drew with Sweden's. Just about drew that game. Darlin in the 89th minute. Late equaliser. But France did bounce back when they did beat Finland. But Israel beat France 3-2. The decisive game, I believe, was between France and Bulgaria. France needed a win. They failed to beat Bulgaria. Bulgaria was the nation that beat them. If France did win that, they would have qualified. They didn't. And that was another World Cup in a row that they failed to qualify for. But then came 1998. Now, as the host nation for the 1998 World Cup, France automatically qualified. Now, 60 years from when they hosted the World Cup, and for the first time in 1938, France hosted this one. And this time, they do a lot better. France end up winning this World Cup final, beating Brazil 3-0 in the final. They also equal a record of the best returning nation to a World Cup after being absent. They're equaling with Uruguay, who missed the 1934 and 1938 World Cups. They missed those two for completely different reasons. Uruguay went on to win in the 1950 World Cup, and France did that the same, missing out in 1990 and 1994, but winning the 1998 World Cup, beating the holders of that World Cup, and that was Brazil, who won the 1994 World Cup. But let's see how that journey started off. The amount of nations that competed at the World Cup in 1998 increased to 32. From the last time that France did compete, which was in 1986 at that time. Now, the top 2 nations of each group will qualify and make it to the last 16. So no third place finishers would qualify. France were in a group with Denmark, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia. And that's the first time that France would have met any of those nations at a World Cup. And though they're in the same continent as Denmark, I don't believe they went up against each other at that time, even at the qualifying stages. France do play Denmark in the future after 98. Played them another 3 times after 98. They also play South Africa again at similar to France in 98, being the hosts. France plays South Africa in 2010. South Africa were the hosts of that World Cup. France, Saudi Arabia, this is the first and only time those nations have met at a World Cup. They haven't met each other since the 98 finals. When I also say meet again, I'm strictly talking about World Cup matches and not any friendlies. France start their campaign beating South Africa 3-0. Thierry Henry scored at the end. They go on to beat Saudi Arabia 4-0. Henry scores again, 2 goals this time. And finally, France beat Denmark 2-1 in their group, taking maximum points in a group. The first time they've took maximum amount of points in a group since 1982. In the second phase, that would be Group B. The Stade Valdrome in Marseille was where France played South Africa. The Stade de France in Saint Denis was the stadium that France played Saudi Arabia in. and the Stade Gerland Lyon was the stadium where France played Denmark. Forgot to mention that the golden goal rule stood in the 1998 World Cup, but only one game was decided like this. That was the game France were in. They were playing Paraguay. So after extra time, the game was 0-0. But in the 114th minute, Laurent Blanc scored for France, taking them through to the quarterfinals. The golden goal rule, after extra time, whoever scores next wins. The game between France and Paraguay was played in the Stade Félix Bollaert in Lens. I hope I said that right. Okay, moving on. The quarterfinals was played between Italy and France. France went through. That game finished 0-0, but France beat Italy 4-3 on penalties. The stadium was the Stade de France. A strong performance for France so far. And then in the semi-finals, they played Croatia. Now, this was Croatia's very first World Cup as an independent nation, not being part of Yugoslavia. And Croatia was leading, but Thuram for France equalised and then scored again, taking France to a 2-1 win over Croatia. These two nations will meet again, or did meet again, 20 years later in the World Cup final. 20 years from 1998, they met again in 2018, where France did win that World Cup for the second time. But for the very first time, France won the World Cup in 1998 in France. At the Stade de France, they beat Brazil, who were the champions at that time, who also won the most World Cups at that time. They still have the most World Cups. Goals from Zidane and Emmanuel Petit secured France's win, their very first World Cup. At the time, they were the first nation for 20 years to win the World Cup for the first time. At that time, Argentina in 1978 won it. Then Italy in 82 in Spain. For 86, Argentina retained, or got it back, I should say. Then in 1990, Germany won it for a third time, as West Germany. And then Brazil won it for the fourth time in 1994. So France broke a trend there. France also became the fourth European nation to win the World Cup, and the seventh nation ever to win the World Cup, and the sixth nation to win the World Cup on home soil. No nation since France has been able to win the World Cup as the hosts. And by hosting the 1998 World Cup, they were the third nation to ever host two World Cups. The 1998 World Cup win for France made the French national team a serious team in the future. Before this, they were definitely underdogs at times, or underachievers, one would say. They won the Euros in 1984, I believe. That's when they won the Euros, and that was the only competition that they did win at the time. After this win, France do go on to win the Euros 2 years later. On paper, this is arguably France's best World Cup team. They've only achieved the World Cup another time 20 years later in 2018. And they could have retained it in 2022, where they reached the final. We'll get onto those 2 World Cups later on. But yeah, this was a major win for France. Alright then, that was episode 4, FIFA members France. Those are all the World Cups that took place in the 20th century that I covered, and how France performed in each one. They've hosted 2, they won 1, finished 3rd twice, and 4th once. The following videos will be France's performance at the World Cups during the 21st century, this one, starting with the 2002 World Cup. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the others. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and bye.